into any more trouble. Let's bring in the Justice Minister, Michael Keenan. He joins us from the nation's capital. Thanks very much for being there.
My pleasure, Peter. How are you?
I am very well. I want to ask you the first question, though, if I can. Where's the justice in all of us having to wait so long to find out what's going on with Stuart, Robert and all the rest of it?
Well, I don't think people have been asked to wait so long. I mean, these are issues that were only raised in the media on Monday, and they were immediately referred to advice by the most senior public servant in the land, who will be providing that advice very shortly. So, look, I don't think that that is an unreasonable amount of time for people to wait. We're methodically, well, not we, but the Prime Minister is methodically having a look at this, and obviously, if he has anything further to say about that, then he will.
I mean, there is a saying, I suppose, Minister, that justice delayed is justice denied. Yours seem to be suggesting it's being neither delayed nor denied here, that proper due process is being followed. But can you look at this situation objectively and give us and give the viewer your sense of how Stuart Robert has conformed to the Ministerial Code of Conduct?
Well, look, that's not up to me. I mean, he's a very valued colleague, and he's done a very good job in both of the portfolios that he's had since we've come to office.
So can I just ask a quick follow-up on that?
Have been referred to.
Is it your view then, Minister?
Sorry,
is it your view then that if he is forced to step aside, the Turnbull front bench will be weakened significantly as a result?
Look, I'm not going to offer a running commentary on any of this, Peter. These are not matters for me as a fellow minister. I mean, Stuart's been a very valued colleague. Obviously, matters for the ministry are always a matter for the Prime Minister, and he's acted very quickly to get the appropriate advice, and he will action that advice once he gets it.
One quick follow-up, if I can, just about this issuing of Rolex watches that we saw being reported. I understand that Ian Macfarlane, Tony Abbott and Stuart Robert received these Rolexes from this Chinese billionaire, but they believed that they were fake, and once they realised that they were real, they handed them back. I wonder, would you feel completely ripped off to get a fake Rolex from a billionaire? I mean, personally, I'd feel completely ripped off. I mean, if there's anyone on this world that I would expect to get a real Rolex from, it's a billionaire.
Look, I really don't have any commentary to run on any of that, Peter. I mean, I've seen the media articles. It's an interesting story from a media perspective, but I've quite frankly got enough to do without having to worry about those sorts of hypothetical questions.
Well, would you think that a former intelligence officer in the military should at least be able to spot a fake Rolex versus a real one?
I hardly think that's an important skill set for someone in military intelligence.
Right, fair enough, fair enough.
Well, someone who does know a real Rolex is your colleague Ian Goodenough.
That's right.
What do you make of his statement of his hard work ethic?
Look, I actually haven't read it, but look,
how could you have missed it?
I'm aware of it, so I haven't read it. But look, I mean, Ian is a very successful person before he came into Parliament.
So he
he's
says.
got the no, well, he is. I mean, he was very successful in business, and he used that success to buy himself a nice watch. So good on him.
Indeed, he does know the time, I suspect, and can get places on time. Did you ever buy yourself anything as a...
We will move on in a moment, Mr. Keenan, I guarantee you.
I'm really hoping we're going to move on to some substantial issues in the next short while.
Look, when I became Premier, my husband bought me a nice ring, the State Stone of New South Wales. I mean, you got a ministerial...
What is the State Stone of New South Wales?
It is a black
Well,
opal,
Christina, I will answer you if we can make an agreement that this is the last question on this issue, but my watch is one that was given to me by my parents for my 30th birthday. I don't think it was particularly expensive, but
it must be an antique by now,
a very
Minister.
nice gift from it.
All right, now
well, it's still running, so...
All right, let's get to some serious questions. I understand in your portfolio area that moves are afoot to ensure that people that have been convicted of a crime can't work in airports around the country. How on earth is it that people who have been convicted of a crime currently can work in airports around the country?
Well, look, the regime that has been in place has been one that's been dedicated to national security. So if you're convicted of a crime within the national security area, then you wouldn't have been able to work at our ports and our airports. When we came to office, we didn't think that was acceptable, and that's far too narrow a definition of people who are appropriate to work in these sensitive areas. So we have now expanded it. Well, if the Parliament passes the legislation that was introduced today, that will now be expanded to include people who would be involved or have been convicted of an offence defence in relation to organised crime, because airports and ports are extremely sensitive, and employment in those areas should not be open to people who have had an involvement in organised crime, and we'll be closing that loophole.
So this loophole that you describe presumably arises because of legislation that Labor introduced in 2013, which didn't have the straight ban on it, but rather gave some discretion, if you will, through regulation for these people to be banned. You spoke in favour of that legislation in 2013. You didn't identify the loophole. What's changed since 2013 to now to convince you that there's a loophole here that needs to be closed?
Well, look, I spoke in favour of that legislation because that was a small step along the road that we needed to take, but unfortunately it didn't go anywhere near far enough for what we need to do to secure these sensitive areas.
But you didn't move any
introduced that
amendments
legislation,
then. You didn't move any amendments then, so what's
we made a
changed
commitment
since
that same year that
2013?
if we came to office that, what changed is we said when we came to office that we would look at securing these areas in a more comprehensive way, and that's what we have given effect to with the legislation introduced today. Look, the problem with Labor's approach is that they promised that they would use criminal intelligence to make these judgments, but then they came up against resistance from the MUA and other union backers, and they backed down and didn't do that. Now, we're not concerned about that, and we're going to make sure that we do pass legislation through the Parliament, because I don't think that Australians would expect that you would be able to have a significant conviction, for example, drug trafficking, and still be allowed to work at our ports and our airports.
I would say that most Australians would be stunned to know that it was possible that situation could have arisen. But I want to move on to the circumstance of Tara Nettleton. Reports that she has been killed in Syria. These follow, of course, reports previously that her husband had been killed as well, leaving effectively 6 young Australian children in the care of Islamic State. Tara Nettleton's parents are calling on the government to do what they can to get the children out of Syria. Is there anything the government can do for these children?
Well, it's very difficult, Christina, because we can't offer consular assistance to somebody in Syria in the middle of a war zone, but we are engaging with representatives of the family, and we are doing so with the welfare of those children uppermost in our mind. I mean, these are children who have essentially been horribly abused by their parents, who have taken them into the most horrible circumstances, but our options are relatively limited to even identify exactly where they are. So, look, it is a difficult situation, but the Australian government, as I said, will be proceeding with the welfare of those children uppermost in our mind.
Can I ask you about Khalid Sharoof, the father, who now appears missing, with unconfirmed reports, as Christina alluded to, that he has been killed? How sure or otherwise is the government, based on its intelligence, about whether he's alive or not?
Look, Peter, I'm just not in a position to confirm whether he is alive or not. It can sometimes be very complicated to make those judgments. Look, I wouldn't comment on individuals anyway. But look, as I said, those parents have done something terrible to those children by taking them into this very precarious and difficult situation. And the government will do what we can to assist. But our suite of options that are available to us, of course, are not unlimited, given the very difficult circumstances they find themselves in.
It's an interesting one, because I know we've chatted a number of times, and I think at one point I must have asked questions, why are we trying to stop people from exiting Australia to go to Islamic State, for example, because in a sense you're getting rid of potential terrorists rather than retaining them. But is this perhaps one part of the answer to that you can end up in this diabolical situation where, with parents either dead or missing, you've got children who, as you've described, have essentially been abused by their parents, that are now left in the kind of position where there's not much the government can do? Is that part of the logic in stopping people from doing this and stopping them from exiting the country?
Look, that is one factor, but overall we don't want Australians going and contributing to this conflict, because what happens when you go there is that you get a network of fellow terrorists, you get an improved and enhanced skill set, and then when you come back to Australia you could be significantly more dangerous than when you left. Also, we don't want Australians contributing to the deterioration of what is already a very bad picture in Syria. So that's the reason why we're stopping Australians from going. But I mean, the points you make about travelling with your family, of course, are another factor, although I'm not aware of many others that have actually done that.
This week at the Senate estimates, the Australian Federal Police in fact confirmed one of their areas of growing concern is Australians seeking to go overseas into these conflict zones, particularly in Syria. But they also confirmed that their resources are being stretched and that they didn't receive any money from an additional funding that went to counterterrorism measures. You as Justice Minister concerned that the AFP has the resources it needs to continue its counterterrorism work?
Yeah, well, look, that's not correct what you said in your introduction. They received a very significant funding boost from the extra investments that we made in the national security architecture. Very significant funding specifically to address the foreign fighter threat.
Well, the AFP's counterterrorism operations, according to the Senate estimates, received nothing from the $1.2 billion dedicated to national security in last year's budget.
Well, the funding envelope is but $1.8 billion, and they received a very significant part of that specifically to address the foreign fighter threat. So, look, that's the situation, Christina, so I'm not sure where you've got your information from, but it's incorrect. We have funded the AFP to deal with this challenge, and we do support them 100%. Now, that doesn't mean, of course, that their officers working in national security are not working at an enormous operational tempo, and my admiration goes out for them for that. But the AFP is a very sophisticated organisation. They are equipped to walk and chew gum at the same time, and they have the 100% support of their government in their very important national security work.
I'm only taking from what is reported to be the AFP's answers to questions on notice through the Senate estimates. It says the AFP's capacity to respond to increased volumes of activities and threat means that resources are stretched. This is an answer that they give. Counterterrorism expert Professor Greg Barton from Deakin University says we may miss out on some human intelligence and social engagement in our work to combat terrorism and extremism if the AFP isn't properly resourced. So you're disputing that the AFP isn't stretched in the work that it's doing.
Now, look, their operational tempo is very high, but as I said, we've stood side by side with them in ensuring that they have the resources that they need to deal with that. And they have been a very significant recipient of extra government funding in relation to that. So, the national security situation in Australia has deteriorated significantly, and that presents challenges for the AFP plus our other security agencies. But we do stand side by side with them in meeting that challenge, and they are doing an exceptionally good job. And that's evidenced by the fact that in Australia we have actually stopped, in the past 18 months, 6 terror attacks on our soil.
Can I just ask you one final question before we let you go, Mr. Keenan? We know that you've got to get to question time, but all of these internal ructions, if I could put it that way, and retirements, it's a messy business for the government, even if there's opportunity in it, such as, for example, renewal. Is it important that the government gets this behind it sooner rather than later, so that the focus can very much be on the policy debates that you want to have in the lead up to the election, rather than sort of internalising, if you like, what's going on inside the government?
Well, look, it's very important that we're focusing on the Australian people and not focusing on ourselves. And I think Australians have, quite frankly, seen far too much of that out of Canberra in the past. In the past 8 or 9 years, what has been a very turbulent period in Australian politics. This government is not going to make that mistake. It's perfectly normal that long-serving members, as an election approaches, would announce their plans, whether they want to recontest the election or not. So I don't think that reflects difficult ructions within the government. I mean, that's just a very normal part of the process. People come in and out of politics. And Warren Truss and Andrew Robb are both very long-serving and, quite frankly, very successful senior members of the government. So I don't know that reflects any internal turmoil. That's just a perfectly normal part of the process of politics.
Justice Minister Michael Keenan, thank you for joining